Hello, good morning. Hi, church. How are you guys doing? Good morning, Hungry Church. Good morning. In our church, we want to grow to become disciples of God who are hungry for God, hungry to grow, hungry to see His power at work in our church, in our city, in our nation, and in ourselves, right? In ourselves, because we believe that Christ in us, the hope of glory. Amen. Today, we are back on our pulpit series, our year-long pulpit series on the Sermon on the Mount, right? So if you remember at the start of the year, we started our Sermon on the Mount series, okay? There are 21 sermons in all, and we did 7 topics, the first 7, If you missed any of these, right, you can check them out both on Spotify as a podcast. You can listen to it on audio, or you can also go listen to it on YouTube, where you can see the slides, a video of this sermon as well. We covered things that Jesus talked about, such as how you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. So your goodness, your mercy, your glory cannot be put under a bowl, but it has to shine. The character of a believer of Jesus is to shine. We shared about how actually Jesus is not coming in order to kind of like subvert the Jewish law, the Hebrew law of Moses, but He's here to be the ultimate fulfillment of it. And the fulfillment of the law exceeds just following the letter of the law. It means living up to the very spirit of the law itself. Then Jesus goes on to compare. He says that you have heard before that you should not murder, but of course you should not murder. And then Jesus says, but I tell you, the true law, the higher law, is that you shouldn't even be angry at your brother. And so Jesus teaches us how to keep the door of anger closed, because if you keep it open for too long, then the enemy comes in to wreak destruction and creates murder in our hearts. He talks about lust. He reminds us the Mosaic law says you shall not commit adultery, right? And then the typical person responding will be like, define adultery, right? Okay? And he says, no, don't even start defining adultery. I'll tell you, if you even harbor and entertain lust in your heart, you are essentially committing adultery in your heart. He goes on. He says that you've heard before. There are only certain parameters by which you can marry and divorce, right? And then Jesus gives the higher law. He says that you need to keep your word. If you make an oath, you need to keep your oath. And Jesus gives a higher law regarding the truthfulness of your word. And this entire section that we've been seeing in Matthew chapter 5 becomes the basis, the starting block from which Jesus is going to come into some of our social relationships and describe for us what a Christian should look like. He's already been describing what a Christian should look like. And so in the next 7 weeks, you're going to see another 7 new topics that Jesus is going to deal with, and we're going to go into this as a church to know what actually is the look of a Christian, right? Today, turn the cheek. Next week, love your enemies. Then no showy spirituality, right? We're going to see how the Lord teaches us to pray. Forgiveness, treasure, what's your true treasure, what you let into your eyes, and then dealing with the whole area of anxiety. Now, I'm very excited because next week, we've got, actually throughout this preaching series, we've got our preaching team, right? Our Sungai Buloh preaching team. I'm so proud of our preaching team here in Sungai Buloh Church, because I really love to be able to sit under the Word of God as preached by others. So next week, you see there in dark green in the middle, May. Auntie May is preaching. May, give us a wave. Yay! Auntie May is at the back today. She's handling a very large cake. Okay, so after service, you have the cake is in, right? It is that big. Okay, it's a multi-tiered cake that someone that was inadvertently gifted to us, okay? And so you guys get to have cake and eat it after the service, okay? And next week, May will serve more than large cake. She will serve a big word of God, okay? And next week, I'm really excited about it. And then later in season 2 of Sermon on the Mount, Pastor Athalia will be sharing on what you treasure and what you let into your eyes. And Lionel will be sharing on anxiety. That will wrap up season 2. And then season 3, you get to hear Pastor Ramesh share on asking, seeking, knocking, right? So I'm really excited about all the other voices that you will get to hear on this pulpit. But Sermon on the Mount as a whole, right? We've always heard this word being attached to the Sermon on the Mount. It's like a manifesto of what Christian discipleship should look like. And yet, it is so confronting. Like, if you really were to read the Sermon on the Mount with modern day eyes, and be really honest about the kind of things Jesus expects of his disciples, it is actually very, very invasive. It invades all the parts of our hearts where we want to fight it and say, no, I have the right to be angry. I have the right to divorce. I have the right to, fight back. I have the right to do whatever I want, And Jesus says, well, when you come to me, you lay down your rights and you pick up the cross. And so we're going to see what picking up the cross is going to look like. Today we are in Turn the Cheek. Everybody say, turn the cheek. Okay, now, today is about revenge, okay? Vengeance. And how Jesus says, in my kingdom, my people do not seek vengeance. My people do the opposite of retaliating. They turn the cheek, right? So what does it mean? Before that, maybe, let me just help us to get on the same page, right? Now, revenge stories are remarkably popular. Okay, the movie-going market alone loves a vengeance story, right? We love, not a vengeance story, okay, a vengeance story, right? We love our revenge films, right? This is just 4 that I think many of you might be able to resonate with, right? Kill Bill, Bride, the wedding totally destroyed by a bunch of, samurai ninja fellas, and then she goes on a 2-movie kind of journey to find Bill. Bill, it's not you. Bro. Nobody here wants to kill Bill. We love Bill, right? Bill is the best, right? But the bride wants to kill a different Bill, right? And so you have this story of a bride who's had her wedding totally destroyed, and she's going to find this Taiko, and she's going to find him and kill Bill, right? And then you've got John Wick, whose revenge narrative is weirdly enough, set off when his dog is brutally murdered, right? You've got Gladiator. We've got Maximus, who was betrayed, and then the rest of it of the film is Maximus trying to work his way up the ranks, of the slaves and all kind of things, and become a gladiator and fight, and eventually to have his eyes on the big man, who is like oppressor, and take him down. And of course, The Revenant, where Leonardo DiCaprio wins his Oscar finally by being mauled by a bear and hiding inside. What did he hide? He hid inside a horse, right, or something like that. So, and then he's left to die by his fellow soldiers, adventurers. And then he doesn't die. So he spends the rest of the movie hunting down those fellas who left him to die, in order to exact revenge on them. Now, the movie-going market loves a revenge story. Do you know why? Ever thought about why? Actually, my personal so-called favorite is Django Unchained, but I think too much Tarantino is bad for your soul, right? Okay, so I suspect the reason why we love revenge stories is because it allows us to act out our secret revenge fantasies that we are too civil in real life to act out. Does that make sense? So in real life, you will not actually like Uma Thurman in Kill Bill, hunt down the people who betrayed you and just, like, chow, 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 and like slice their head off and like all that kind of things. You will not actually work your way through, being mauled by a bear and hiding inside a horse or whatever it is, to find the people who betrayed you so that you can, do really bad things to them. But guess what? We entertain it in our heads. We have all these fantasies in our heads where we mentally, emotionally, imaginatively on our anger. And this sermon is very closely related to the sermon on anger and murder, because when we harbor desire for vengeance, we are allowing that murder to grow inside us and to go from being a cicak, a lizard, house lizard, beyond cicak, become biawak. Biawak then grow bigger, become what? Become Komodo dragon. Komodo dragon grow bigger, become what? It becomes buaya, right? The crocodile. Crocodile grow bigger, become what? The reticular python, whatever you want to call it, right? That 30 feet fella, okay? And then from that, it becomes the dragon. And we know that the dragon is that serpent of old who will be thrown down by Jesus to be judged forever. It is this serpent that is working in our midst all the time. All the time. Jesus gives us, Paul gives us another metaphor. He says that Satan is like a roaring lion going about everywhere all the time looking for someone to devour. So this serpent, the great serpent of all, great not being great in stature, but big and to be reckoned with, right, is something that is looking out to devour Christians all the time. But you know how he devour? He doesn't devour by just like, rawr, and then you're like, I lost an arm, serpent bite me, right? The way that serpent devours is it gets into your heart and it makes you bitter and angry. And when I pay you back, I will show you, one day I'll get my revenge on you. And then it turns you from being a reasonable person to becoming an unreasonable person, frankly, a monster. And we've all maybe heard this saying before, beware that when fighting monsters, you do not yourself become a monster. And we see this happen so often, so often. If you're a history buff, you will know that almost every single violent revolution to take down an oppressor, the people who replace that violent revolution, that new government promising, liberty and peace and all the kind of things, eventually become the same monster that they took down. But it's not just about governments replacing governments. It's also about you in your homes, right? Because or you in your workplaces, you have a boss who is really unjust, who is really crude, let's say, who is very whatever you have fill in or a family member, whatever it might be, right? And in your bid to come and stand up against them, and I'll show you, man, I'll show you one day, you end up so easily, we can all end up becoming like the very thing that we found disgusting. The only problem is we don't often have a mirror to see ourselves. In fact, if you were to see ourselves in the mirror, we would justify our own monstrosity. But that's something for us to be very careful about. So today's text, Jesus says this. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye, and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you. Do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word. We're going to go into this today. Okay, we're going to go deep. But first, this part of the Sermon on the Mount is often the part that people say, wow, Sermon on the Mount, very susah one, You know why very susah? Because Jesus says you have to love your enemies. Is this part. This today and next week. Next week, May is preaching love your enemies, which is a continuation of turning the cheek, right? And this New Testament scholar, his name is E. Stanley Jones, he says this of today's Bible passage. We have reached the very crux of the whole Sermon on the Mount. This refusal to retaliate, the turning of the other cheek, and the loving of one's enemies is the center of the whole. If this principle is not workable, then the heart of the sermon does not beat. It is a carcass, a dead body of doctrine. And when I read this, I was stunned. I was just thinking, wow, we can teach what it means to be followers of Jesus. We can teach all we want to teach about. Don't take oath, don't get angry, don't simply divorce. And later you will see, this is how you pray, this is how you forgive. You can teach all of these things. But at the very, very core, like Sermon on the Mount core, is this. Can you be in a place where you will hold back from retaliation and instead show love to your enemy, right? By the way, who is your enemy? Satan. Sometimes, you know the saying, right? The full saying is, love your neighbor, right? Okay? And then the old Hebrew axiom is, love your neighbor, hate your enemy, right? And then Jesus says, I tell you, love your neighbor. You'll hear it next week, right? Love your neighbor. You have heard before, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, right? So I ask you actually, who's your enemy? And then often we will say that the mother-in-law who is persecuting me, that is my enemy, right? Or like my boss's boss, that is my enemy, right? Or wow, this intern that I have, wow, I tell you, I want to get vomit blood, wow, that's my enemy. And you will name one person or another or another or another. Neighbors who feed monkeys. Oh, that is our neighborhood right now. We have one neighbor who brings a crate of fruits to feed the monkeys. I mean, I live next to a hill, Bukit Gasing area, right? And because of that, the monkey numbers proliferate. There's so many, and then they trash all the houses. They trash all the rubbish bins, And you just cannot reason with this neighbor because she will say, they were here first. I'm like, oh my gosh. I can't. Jesus, love your enemies. Yeah, I know, right? Now, here's the thing. The cell group that meets in my house at night when there are no monkeys around, okay? The cell group that meets in my house were discussing this point a few weeks ago. And we're discussing this point on turning the cheek, and loving your enemies, And one of my cell members raised the question, actually, this bad neighbor, the angry boss, the mother-in-law, or whatever it is, you can name it, okay, whatever it is, okay, whoever they are, all these people, do they fall under love your enemies? Or do they fall under love your neighbor? And that really should make you think about if these people should be thought of as, actually it's not even love your enemies. These are the people who are your neighbors. You should love your neighbors. Then actually, who is the enemy, right? And maybe the enemy is that serpent who is animating, enemy-like behavior among your neighbors. So, and let's not forget, maybe animating serpent-like behavior in us so that we end up becoming an enemy to our neighbors as well, right? 3 points. We're going to look at retaliation and how in retaliation systems, everyone gets harmed. Point number 2. We're going to look at a radical response that Jesus brings forward, right? And how this radical response of turning the cheek flips the power dynamic in every confrontation, okay? And of course, the third point is we'll look at some real people across history who met oppression, who met violence, who met that kind of behavior, met violence with violent hatred. They met it with love. They met it with turning the cheek. Okay, so we'll get into this. First point, retaliation. Are you guys doing okay? Turn to your friend next to you and say, let's go. Come on, let's turn to some friend next to you and say, let's go. Okay, retaliation. Everyone gets harmed. The original Hebrew Mosaic law says eye for eye, tooth for tooth, right? The full rendering of the verse is in multiple parts of the Old Testament. It's not just one verse. It's that similar type of verse in at least 3 different parts of the Torah. It says this, but if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and bruise for bruise. It's like, wow. It's not just eye for eye and tooth for tooth. It's actually the whole thing. This is literary way of saying commensurate punishment. Equal punishment, right? But I tell you this, most of the time when we see this, what are your immediate thoughts? Very violent, right? Okay? And we find it hard to resonate with this kind of idea. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, burn for burn, wound for wound, hand for hand. Like, wow, chop my hand, then got chop your hand. Wow. Or like, wow. But it gets hard because like, you murder my children, I murder your children back, right? You rape my girls, I rape the girls back, law. My tribe rape, you abuse my people, I abuse your people back, law. And so it goes back and forth. Actually, why God give this kind of law? It sounds really animalish, law. You need to ask these questions. Actually, God, why is a good God giving this kind of law? Actually, there is a reason. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. It's about ensuring that justice exists, and it's actually preventing overkill when you want to pay back. So you will see in other parts of, I told you, right, this verse appears multiple times, right? In one of the parts, it is actually phrasing it to say, don't be lenient in a random kind of way, where you choose some people, talking to judges, talking to the people who are executing justice. Don't be alang, you like to be lenient, then you are lenient to this fellow because you like their face. And then you don't like to be lenient, then you meet them with the full force of the law. And the wording was, do not show mercy, give to these people every similar case, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, burn for burn, hand for hand, and so forth. The first part, ensuring justice, is to make sure that the judges in Israel do not practice favoritism, that they are establishing the consequences of the law evenly, justly, and fairly in every situation, such that the judges were not to be there to use their own passions in order to decide how the law is distributed, but the law was expected to be an objective thing that would apply the moment the facts of the case trigger the punishment, then the punishment is triggered, whether people like you or not. So this was the original intent of eye for eye, tooth for tooth. But another intent for eye, tooth for tooth is that it prevents overkill. Because what's stopping me if you kill my goat, I kill your whole tree of your goat. So it's eye for three eyes for one eye, right? You injured my son, I kill two of your children. Because the law of the jungle, you'll get that. Because people are not going to, govern their vengeful, desires by being like super calm, like, oh, you cut my hand now, I cut you, and then you're like there, everything with one hand is like, oh, I already cut one hand, even already, I will stop now, right? And then the fella's still insulting you, like, you cut my hand, he's like, I will hold back because the law says arm for arm, right? No, if the law doesn't say arm for arm, you whack the fella until die, man, because what? In the inflamed, in violent passions, you will just go for it. So the law expects that people will go for it. The law expects, and Jesus, when he says this, he knows that the heart of man will be to overkill. And so the original law is there to make sure that when you want to balas dendam, it's actually just level. Like you kill one cow, I kill back one cow. Settle, 搞了. No need. You. If I kill two cows, then you will come back and kill my second cow, and then back and forth, right? And so this was the intent of the law. Okay, that the thing is, Jesus is going to come into this space and say that, look, yes, it was there to ensure justice. Yes, it was there to prevent overkill. But I'm going to give you the higher law. The higher law is when you absorb the violence, the cycle of death and payback ends. And there is no more room to pay back, to give back again. Like if Victor and I, he hit me, then I hit him, then he said, you hit me, he hit me back. And then 2 generations down, his descendants hit my descendants hit his descendants. And you know what? Nobody remembers who started the fight. Nobody remembers. The only thing our descendants will remember, my descendants will remember that the last time Victor's descendants whacked us. Therefore, now we have to whack them back. And Victor's descendants will remember, you know what? The last time, Fergus Punya descendants whacked us. So we will whack them back. Is that not right? Now, I don't always like to make reference to current affairs. But you ask one group of people, they will say, we whacked because of October 7th. You ask another group of people, they will say, we whacked because, and then they'll name you another date. And both sides will keep naming you dates. And the dates might go back a little bit back in history. But church, we are Christians. The Christian ethic is to turn the cheek, not to name the last date on which we were aggrieved, and as though naming that date gives us a moral license to now do the same. So retaliation is not the answer. What is the answer? A radical response. And what is this radical response, right? Now I'm going to fly a different text in, right? Romans chapter 12. Paul, effectively giving commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. He says this, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, Paul quotes, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. You see, the Christian ethic is a deeply, deeply counter-cultural ethic. The Christian way is not to be like the way of the world. And Paul says it here so clearly. Do not take revenge. If your enemy is hungry, do what? Laugh at them, mock them, spit at them? No. Let the food through. Let the food aid through. That's the Christian way. If your enemy is thirsty, give them water, because they too were created in the image of God. Yahweh created each of us. And it will not fly with Jesus Christ. It might fly with whatever other God you have. But it will not fly with Jesus Christ to say that my enemy is starving, I starve them even more. My enemy is thirsty, I thirst them out even more. I dry them out even more. And Jesus, one day, you're not scared. You see Jesus one day, you're not scared that he will say to you, I don't know you, man. I don't know you. Call yourself a Christian. I don't know you. Your father is someone else. You see where this is going? You see where this is going, right? Let me take it down a notch. So, Jesus Christ says in the Sermon on the Mount, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek. Now, it's interesting he says right cheek. He could have said any cheek, because he could have just said if anyone slaps you, turn the other cheek, right? But he says right cheek. So you need to understand a little bit of the detailing. Right cheek. Most people are right-handed. So if I'm standing in front of Rodney, and Rodney were to slap my right cheek, how would Rodney have to slap me on the right cheek? Either, one of two ways. Either Rodney so happens to be a left-handed, or he's not. That's why I didn't use Ramesh as an example, because he is left-handed. That wouldn't work. But Rodney being a right-hander, you are, right? If he is to slap me with on my right cheek, it would either have to be with his left hand, which will be unnatural, and he likely will never do that. But it would have to be like this. Backhand slap, right? And a slap in public is already, especially in the honor-shame culture, like the Middle East, where this is taking place, already extremely insulting, enough to start a war between clans. I assure you, any slap, a backhand slap, is even more demeaning. Because a backhand slap is a way of saying that you are beneath me. You do not backhand slap someone who is of the same social standing as you. So people would typically backhand slap their slaves, backhand slap their lowly workers, right? And so to backhand slap someone is to slap them on the right cheek. So let's put a pause on that. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. This is quite strange, right? So in the Middle East, at that time, people would typically wear an inner garment. It's called the tunic. And they would wear the outer garment, which is the cloak, right? So tunic in the modern English translations is the shirt, the inner shirt, right? And the cloak is your outside coat, right? Now, there is a Hebrew law in the Mosaic law that if you were to borrow money from someone and you have to give your cloak as collateral, meaning you're promising that I will pay back, and then you give away your coat temporarily as collateral. The person who is lending cannot hold your coat past sunset. The moment it is night, even though it was collateral, they have to give it back. So you have to release the collateral. Why? Because if they are cold that night and they cry out to God, God says, I will hear their cry. And woe on you for holding their coat as collateral until they are cold at night. This is our God. This is our God. And so the background to, if someone sues you to take your shirt, give them your cloak as well, is this. To give someone your cloak as well is to say, I give, having lost your shirt, you give your cloak as well. It's giving the last thing on you already. Voluntarily, It's weird. Let's go on. We'll get there. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, you could go with them 2 miles. Now, in the Roman governed lands that, Judea at this point is, it was customary that, it was law actually, that a Roman soldier could compel any normal civilian to carry their things for up to 1 mile. Okay, so that was a thing that Roman soldiers could do. So if I had a 6-mile journey and I didn't want to carry my things because I'm too posh to carry my own things, right? I can just make any of you, anyone, right? A soldier walks in, make you carry and walk with him, 1 mile. And at the end of 1 mile, okay, fine, put down. I'll find another person. You come carry my things, and then they will have to walk with them another mile. And literally, you can chain a bunch of people to carry your barang for long, long journeys, right? But you can't make the same person walk more than 1 mile. That's the Roman law. And so, this thing, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, Jesus is saying, why stop at 1 mile? Go 2 miles. It's like, what? Why would you do that? Sudahlah, I already walked 1 mile. I already don't like walking 1 mile. You want me to go 2 miles? Go help this fellow. I kill him, man. I tell you, go help him so much. Let's go on. Give to the one who asks you. Do not turn away from the one who has to borrow. Fairly straightforward. If people come and need generosity, people come and need help, Jesus is saying, just give. Don't turn them away. Just give. Okay? Now, turn the cheek. Right? Now, this all three, A, B, C, D, all four, okay, I'm going to summarize them as turn the cheek. Okay, turn the cheek is going to be stand-in for turning the cheek, giving the cloak, going the 2nd mile, and giving to the one who asks. Now, it's very important you know this. To turn the cheek is not to passively let people mistreat you. Turn to the friend next to you. Turn to the friend next to you and say, it's not to accept mistreatment. Turn to that. It is not to accept mistreatment. Jesus is not saying you should be dum-dum and like a doormat. Now, our culture today, we do not like our people being doormats, right? We tell people that they should feel empowered, they should be true to themselves, they should know their rights, they should stand up for themselves, and you gotta give it to the man, And so we do not like doormats and we do not accept it. Jesus is not telling his Christians that they should just roll over and let them, be bullied. So this is not. It is not. You just need to know it is not. So I'm going to tell you now what it is. To turn the cheek can mean probably one of two things, okay? And I'm going to share to you in ascending order. The first one, it is the view that I always had since I became a Christian. It is a view that some scholars kind of go near, okay? It is not the best view, but it is a valid view, okay? And to turn the cheek is a little bit like this. It's letting the aggressor make a public spectacle of their own monstrosity. Now, there are other words than letting them make. I thought about this a long time last night. I was like downstairs alone, she had gone to sleep, and I was sitting there in front of the slide, trying to word it and reword it and reword it and reword it. But I've settled with this. But another way you can think of it is provoking your aggressor to see whether they will be a monster. Does that make sense? It is challenging your aggressor to see what comes out, kindness or violence. Another word, it is inciting them to shame themselves in public. So let me put it into an example. Someone slaps you in public. Everyone turns. Everyone's shocked. It's like, wow. Oh my gosh. Oh, shh. Total hush. Everyone's looking. Now you can fight back, and then the moment you throw a punch, you throw a return slap, it's all chaos already. Their fellas will come on you, your fellas will come on them, and then it's a big melee, it's gone. The whole day is finished, right? Instead, if you turn the cheek, you are saying to this person, you want to be a monster and slap me? I double dare you. Do it again. Now that everyone's looking, do it again. Do it again. Because when you do it again, now everyone's going to see what a monster you are. Right? And that person is now, the aggressor is now put in a position of, okay, what do I do now? Do I take the bait and slap them one more time? Because I backhand slap you already, huh? Now I can just follow through one more time, right? But if I do that, the crowd who is watching will start to, the public opinion of how I am is going to start to change, right? And so when I'm in that position, as I said, I'm the aggressor, okay? I'm actually put to a decision on whether I want to back off or whether I want to double down on being a bigger monster and blasa the guy one more time, right? But to blasa the guy one more time, to whack him one more time, comes at a cost as well. And so one way you can think about this is that it's a form of non-violent resistance, a non-violent daring or a challenge to see whether that person is made of monstrous stuff or to see whether that person can back down. Now, this is particularly true of the example about the coat. If you are sued for your tunic in Hebrew culture, you let go of your tunic, your inner shirt. But when Jesus says, I take off my cloak and I give it to you as well, you're dealing with a man who literally is already naked, right? The public, that nakedness will become visible to the public. The coat now also, you're giving the coat. You want to take my tunic? Tell you what, I give you my coat as well, right? And the person, the aggressor, receiving the coat is now being publicly shamed. Actually, it's not the naked person who is being shamed. The person who is taking the coat is in the position where they are being shamed for being such a horrible winner. Winning in a lawsuit, right? Such a horrible winner, right? And so they are placed in this position where by you giving the other person your coat, you are daring them, the moment they receive it, to show everybody what a complete monster they are. Now, I think that there's something quite powerful about that kind of courage, though at the same time, I don't think this is the ultimate way Jesus means but I certainly see it as one of the valid ways we can think about it. Does the example make sense? You guys see it? I think the truest way to think about turning the cheek is that it results in a reversal of the dynamics of power between the aggressor and the one being aggressed. It is an unexpected, not just a daring or a challenge, but it is an unexpected show of generosity that completely undermines their act of violence on you. Let me give you example by example. Someone sues you for your coat, your tunic. You give them your tunic, right? Now, according to the lawsuit and the damages were already named. You have to give your tunic, it is settled, right? So once you give your tunic, it's settled. The case is over. Damages have been paid. To give your cloak is to give them a gift. It is to give a bonus on top of the damages to say, the tunic I had to give because I lost the lawsuit. The tunic I had to give because it is in obedience to the law. The coat I give you voluntarily. So in the first instance when you are giving the tunic, you are giving it as the loser in a lawsuit. Someone who has to pay damages. The power balance is that you are below and they are above. They hold the power. They can exact from you the damages. But having paid the damages, now you give them a gift. They can't control the situation. You flip the dynamic such that now you are a person, you are placing yourself in the social rank of someone who can give them a gift. Even though you're naked after giving them the gift, you are positioning yourself as someone with the social status of being a gift giver rather than a damages payer. Does that make sense? And in so doing, you flip the power dynamics. Same thing for the second mile. You see it very clearly in the second mile. When a Roman soldier forces you to go 1 mile with them, you have to, because they are soldier, you are civilian. Soldier can make civilians do things. But after you've gone 1 mile, when you go the second mile, it is in the second mile where the dynamics change. You are no longer a civilian who can be pushed around by the soldier. You gave that second mile for free, voluntarily, out of the goodness of your heart, so that now they are indebted to you. You have done an act of kindness to them. You have been generous with them. And now, whoever who is looking, the story will spread, and you yourself will know, they themselves will know, that in some weird economics of goodwill, they owe you. They may never repay you, but they owe you. And the dynamics completely shift. Do you see this? Do you see how turning the cheek, instead of going into a slugfest with them, turning the cheek flips the narrative and it changes the power dynamics such that now from being in a position of weakness, the Christian can, through non-violent resistance and also non-violence, radical generosity to give that extra, that suddenly the aggressor is put down several notches and the one aggressed is lifted up in their social standing. And in this way, Jesus says elsewhere, the first shall be last, the last shall be first. Take up your cross and follow me. So the way of Christ is a radical way. His way is not like any other way. His way will come against every impulse you have to fight back, to seek vengeance for yourself, to get payback, and to feel good, nice about it. He says, don't go and look for that. Feel nice about it. But love your enemy. Can this be done in the real world? I believe it's being done every day by Christians who are under pressure all over the world. Not least of all, right here in KL. Not least of all, in your workplaces, in your homes, in your neighborhoods. It is happening already. And I do trust that some of you are already being those people. But today I share this with you to give you some examples. Maybe our generation is thirsty for heroes and role models, you know, and not just hero and role model in Jesus, even though we will look to Jesus and land on Jesus, but to see that, you know, some human who is not, you know, fully God, fully man, you know, can also do it. It can be done. And I'll start by sharing you the example of a man who's not even a Christian in that sense. The man is highly, highly respected. Can you all guess who I'm going to show? Gandhi, right? Gandhi should rightly be a role model until today, should be a role model for non-violent response to utter horrific violence. Can I say this? Most of us grew up in Malaysia, right? And in my adult life, I've taken an interest in post-colonial studies. Okay, post-colonial studies is the study of understanding how the colonies are affected by the colonizer, right? And one interesting thing I learned about the British colonial violence is that most of British colonial violence happens on faraway colonies. Now, we are very familiar with America, racial relations, and the transatlantic slave trade and the way black slaves were treated. We are very familiar with that story. At least we watch it in movies. We watch movies like Django, and you kind of get the flavor of what it was like. And for America, it was very different because the abuse of slaves was happening right in everyone's homes. It was happening in their cotton fields. It was happening in their tobacco fields. It was happening all throughout the country, right on your doorstep. So if a slave was tied to a tree and had his skin ripped out, and yes, they did that very frequently, everyone would see it. And so culturally, when both the Civil War and then, 100 plus years later, the Civil Rights Movement in the mid-60s, when these things happen, it's because good, conscionable Christians are seeing this happening on their doorstep, and there is a reaction because they see it every day. And I learned in my adulthood that the Brits were no less vicious. British colony, no less vicious. The only difference is that all the violence, all the slavery was happening out there in the colonies. Such that when I discovered that actually in all the sugarcane plantations in the Caribbean, where they harvested sugar, where they made rum and all kinds of things, the amount of violence being perpetrated on slaves was through the roof. You would gag if you hear some of those stories. But the British public did not know how violent it was like in the colonies. So actually, it took a long time before stories would filter back, and then the local public would have a response. Why am I sharing you this? Because Gandhi is a guy who's in the colonies and responding to colonial violence, right? And this is something that Gandhi himself said. He said, "Enter with me into the sufferings, not only of the people of India, but of the whole world. Non-violence is more active and a real fight against wickedness than retaliation, whose very nature is to increase wickedness. It is not a weapon of the weak, it is the weapon of the strongest and the bravest." So Gandhi was also famous for saying that you cannot use violence and wickedness, the weapons of wickedness, against those who are wicked. You just cannot. It does not go to use the weapons of wickedness to take down wickedness. And so I tell you a story. During that time, right, 1930, from the 1920s onwards, there was the British colonial government, the British Raj, to be precise, the British Raj imposed a tax on salt. So you cannot buy salt without paying tax. You cannot even harvest salt without paying tax. It was a monopoly and it was heavily taxed. Salt is something everyone uses. So Gandhi organized a 24-day walk from his ashram to the coast, okay? And along the way, he gathered tens of thousands of people following him, okay? Following him from afar. Some of them, like a few thousand, actually walked with him on those 24 days. But at every village, at every town that he passed by, in total, tens of thousands of people came out to support and to cheer. And he made that walk with that group all the way to the coast, where in defiance, in non-violent defiance of the British Raj, he stooped down and harvested salt from the edge of the waters. And he would be duly arrested for that act 1 month after it. And in the wake of that, it literally stirred up a whole movement of Indians who would do the same, right? In non-violent protest, to do an act as simple as picking up salt from the edge of the sea, and then get beaten, get brutalized, get jailed. And in the wake of this, I think 60,000 people, I read it 2 nights ago, 60,000 across the span of time were imprisoned because of this. And the non-violent protest led to a point where Gandhi would lead India to a point of independence from the British Raj. This photo here, right, is Gandhi with some of the crowd on the Salt March. And this is a commentator who said this about Gandhi's non-violent response. He says this: to arrest Gandhi in this situation, now Gandhi was on his way, he was going to pick up the salt, and the British Raj was watching. They knew it was happening. They were stuck. And this is the same stuck that Jesus is talking about. To arrest Gandhi at this point is to set fire to the whole of India. But to not arrest him is allow him to set fire, right? On so-called metaphorical language, set fire to a whole prairie. In either case, the government stands to lose. Arrest him, and it looks very bad on the Raj. Don't arrest him, and he's shaming the Raj, right? So in either case, the government stood to lose, and Gandhi stood to gain. That is because Gandhi's cause is righteous, and the government's cause was not. And so, my friends, as you stand in righteous, non-violent response against darkness, remember that God, remember what Paul said at the start, He will take vengeance. He will vindicate you. But if you go and seek vengeance for yourself, then actually you are usurping God's power to vindicate you and let His divine justice roll out. We should remember that we don't live in times where Gandhi is remembered. Acts like this are valorized. If anything, we live in times where the opposite is true, where everybody wants to pay back. And I was listening to a podcast not long ago. I didn't manage to find time to research the details before today, but remembered it last night, so I quickly added this slide. I think in one of the towns, this is a statue, no, not a gold statue in Florida. It is a statue of this militant freedom fighter called Vinayak Savarkar. Veer Savarkar. Veer is an honorific, right? So this guy was the opposite of Gandhi's ethos. Contemporary to Gandhi. In fact, some people link him to the assassin who shot Gandhi. But of course, it's not rock solid. But Savarkar was one of the heavily militant, far right-wing nationalists, Hindu nationalists in India, right? And so he was one of those people who was championing like violent attacks on the British and so on and so forth, on the Raj and so on and so forth. Totally different approach from Gandhi. Not too long ago, and this is the bit that I didn't manage to fact check which town or which city, a statue of Gandhi was removed and put from a very high-profile part of the town to a low-profile part of town. And in the place of Gandhi's statue, they erected a statue of Savarkar. And this is, if nothing else, just to create the conversation among us. That we live in times when the ethic of Gandhi, the non-violent response of Gandhi, is being brought down one or two notches in the eyes of how the world thinks what is right. And in its place, we are starting to valorize responses of violence and retaliation and so forth. We need to be very, very careful, because one of Gandhi's own, if you can say, disciples of his way was Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, in researching for today's sermon, I ended up reading a whole lot more about the civil rights movement than I planned to, right? And you all need to know that the civil rights movement in the 1960s was really a response to a very heavily segregated American culture where blacks could not enter white churches. Blacks could not go to the same schools. You cannot sit in the same bus, or at least the same part of the bus. You are not allowed to go to the same grocery stores, and so on and so forth. If you are a black father, you need to tell your child that fun fair, us colored people can't go to this fun fair. It's not for us. And Martin Luther King Jr., he literally describes a father who had to tell his son that. And the son would ask the father back, why do white people treat us this bad? What did we ever do wrong? Right? And so because of the racial segregation, Martin Luther King Jr., I'm just going to shorten Dr. King, right? Dr. King, or MLK, right, began a wave of non-violent protests where his people would sit in and protest, and then the police would come and then jail a whole bunch of them, and then from city to city, wave after wave, they would stand and protest against segregation, right? Too many stories to tell, but you need to know one thing about MLK, right? He trained his people. He actually trained his people to have a non-violent response. So if you were a young person, being so-called radicalized by Dr. King to be a non-violent protester, right? He would train you by having a bunch of, let's say all of us were being trained, and the trainers, their own people, would come and mock you, slap you, spit on you, as a way to train you to hold it together and not retaliate. And when I read that, I thought, my goodness, this is different level altogether. He's a Christian, by the way. And in fact, in one of his, he used to preach almost every Sunday, going from church to church, right? And in one of his sermons, he was sharing about the stubbornness of sin from being able to get out of the human soul. And he was saying to his church that morning that the sin that you have, you cannot get it out on your own. You need the strength of God, the power of God to come into your soul, and you need to give it permission to work in your body, to work in your heart, and drive out that sin from you. That's the only way that God can work in you to cause you to change from being a violent person to becoming a non-violent person. And yet, it wasn't just rhetoric for MLK. He actually gathered his people and trained them to have a non-violent response. And it left me thinking, church, how well trained are we? The answer is not well trained. It left me thinking, if we go into the real world and we face the pressures tomorrow, Monday morning, how prepared are we? The answer is not well prepared. Dr. King prepared his people because he also had people who were ready to stand and go through that kind of training, which is very demeaning. And I ask us, what gets rid of the sin in our hearts? The answer is the power of God. Exactly as Dr. King said, it is the power of God, because we cannot get it out ourselves. And when you stand face to face against an aggressor, your impulse will be to fight back. I might go as far as to call it natural, because you need to protect yourself. fight back. You either fight or you flee, right? Fight or flee. But Jesus gives us the third way. The third way is to stand and in loving generosity, do something nice for them. Do something loving for them. And it throws the entire economy of violence out of whack, completely out of whack, such that the aggressor is immediately disarmed and can no longer openly aggress on you. And we see it most in Jesus. Can I have the worship team on stage? You see Jesus arrested, betrayed by Judas with a kiss. He could have paid back. You see Jesus being questioned by Pilate, and Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom was of this world, my people would come and fight. Jesus would say that if my kingdom were of this world, I could send angels. My Father could send angels and set me free from this cross. But he did not. Like the turning of the cheek, like the going of the second mile and the giving away of the cloak on top of the tunic, Jesus absorbed that violence and put spectacle upon the evil powers of this world and brought every aggressor to total shame for what they have done. And far more than that, now they owe him a debt of gratitude, because in absorbing their violence, he forgave them of their sins. Now I want to do this just to underscore the point. Imagine Jesus on the cross. And I give you an alternate ending to the Gospels. Humor me for a moment. Close your eyes. It's going to be quite disgusting, but close your eyes. Jesus on the cross. A light bulb goes up on his head. He says, why am I doing this? He calls down immediately a legion of angels. They release him from the cross. He comes down. First person he looks for is Pilate. He goes up to Pilate and he goes, you see? You see? And then he gives Pilate a slap on the face. Then he goes to Herod. He says, you sent your people to beat me up. And then Jesus trashes Pilate, completely trashes him, beats him, pummels him into a pulp. Then he goes to the Praetorian guards, and they are frightened, stone cold. And Jesus takes the whips that not long ago were used on him, and he starts using the whips on him, clawing at them, tearing off their flesh. He rips into all of them. He kills all of them. Some of them are lying on the floor, bleeding, dying, and he goes up to them and spits on their face, and he says, now you know who's God. And he goes to Judas, and he puts his hand around Judas' neck, and he lifts him up 1 foot above the ground. He squeezes Judas' neck, and he looks him in the eye as Judas is petrified with fear. And he lets him down with a thud on the floor. And he says, you watch out, man. You watch out. Nobody crosses the Son of Man. And this Jesus would have gotten his payback. Not too different from Kill Bill or The Revenant. He would have gotten his revenge. Shame them, put them in their place. And it feels a bit like a movie version of a victory, because now he can go off into the sunset. And if the credits roll, you feel like, yeah, serves them right. But you know, there is no sunset to go into. You have to wake up the next morning and face yourself. You have to wake up the next morning and face public opinion. And that Jesus would have to wake up the next day and face maybe his disciples who will come to him, and one or two who are not clued in will be like, yeah, boss, you did it, you showed them. But actually the rest of them will be like, why? We looked up to you. I know we couldn't do it ourselves, but we looked up to you because you could, and we always knew you could. Why? Why did you do that? And now how are you going to die? Old? With what? Hypertension and heart problems? Is that how you're going to die, Jesus? Lonely, alone, with all your followers, maybe cutting down from many to few and few to fewer? Is that your God? I know it's a horrible, horrible alternate ending to the gospel story, because it is no gospel story at all. The gospel of Jesus Christ is the very opposite of revenge and payback. It is a Jesus who's, while hanging on the cross, gave a generous offering of everlasting life and said of his perpetrators, of his oppressors, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And this is our gospel. Can we rise to our feet? Can we rise to our feet? This is the God who is worth worshipping, worthy of our respect, worthy of our love, because he can do and he did something that none of us naturally know how to do. But he can give you that strength to hold up in the midst of aggression. And how will he give you that strength? Like Dr. King said, you yield to him and let him into your heart, so that the power and strength of God invades your soul and drives out sin, drives out violence, drives out retaliation, and fill you with a new and different way to be human, fill you with a different way to treat other humans. And will you not worship this King?